Hi, I'm Carol Anderson, and this is my action research project. It's titled Increasing Connection Through 5-Minute Meaningful Interactions. I completed my action research project at Evergreen Middle School. This middle school is located in Hillsboro, Oregon. It has almost 800 middle school students that attend. It's made up of 7th and 8th grade. There's about 35 students per class, and the students have 6 classes every day, which means they also have about 6 different teachers every day. Our student population is made up of about 40% students who identify as Latino and approximately 50% of students who identify as white. About half of our student population receives and qualifies for free and reduced lunch. And Evergreen is a middle school that has 6 elementary schools that feed into it. Why that is interesting data to me is because out of those 6 elementary schools, 2 of them qualify for Title I funds, and 2 of them have families that traditionally would be identified as like upper class. And so we have a vast array of students that come into Evergreen. The Evergreen Middle School School Improvement Plan has a couple goals, and one in mind that stuck out to me for the purpose of this project was this one. With a focus on equity, becoming trauma-informed, and positive relationships, we will narrow the racial discrepancy in our discipline data by 5% while reducing the overall amount of discipline incidents by 100 referrals at Evergreen. Well, after I went and looked at data to find out when and where are these referrals happening, this is what I found. It seems the vast majority of behavioral incidents occur in the classroom and that they are characterized as defiance. So then I started thinking, okay, what do I do to lower defiance in the classroom? So I did some research, and here's just a couple key points that I came up with. School-based efforts to promote students' SEL, social emotional learning, may enhance a child's success in school. Positive and respectful relationships is one component of a student feeling connected to school. And those who feel connected or develop meaningful relationships with their students experience fewer classroom behavioral problems and more academic success. So I think it was really that third bullet point that brought it home for me. Okay, if I could come up with an intervention that would help a teacher to develop a more meaningful and powerful relationship with their students, could that help lower behavioral incidences and help increase academic success? So I found an intervention called 5 Radical Minutes. This is not something I made up myself. It was pre-existing. So here's what I did. I facilitated a daily 5-minute social emotional curriculum in one teacher's classroom for one period of the day. I completed this intervention between February 3rd up until March 13th. That was the last day we were in school before the school closures happened due to COVID-19. During the intervention, I randomly paired students with each other by using playing cards. As they walked in the classroom, I stood at the door, I greeted them, and I handed them a playing card. And then once we all entered the class, we looked at our playing cards, and I say we because I had a card, the teacher had a card, everyone who was in the class that day had a card. And then we went and kind of found who our match was. So you just matched up with someone who had the same color and number as you did. And this was how I designed a random pair selection every single day. So each day I prepared a new script or a new slide with a prompt. And so this first slide at the top shows a slide that says, talk about the importance of honesty or telling the truth. And in pairs, students took turns talking and listening in 2-minute increments. So student A would talk for 2 minutes first, and then student B would talk for 2 minutes following. And when you're not talking, you're just listening. And the last 1 minute of the intervention was spent then sharing things that you noticed you had in common. Before I left, there was always a daily challenge on the board, and this related back to whatever the question that was posed was. So this daily challenge just said there are many reasons that being truthful is important. One that matters most is whether people trust you often rests on whether they experience you as being honest. Notice today's moments when you're very truthful and any moments when you might want to hide the truth a little. Did it make you feel any differently? And I would always have a student read that at the end of the intervention. it became clear to me early on that I needed to remind the students why it was that I was doing this. This is a best practice when it comes to teaching. Whenever you're teaching a standard, you're telling the students, this is the standard I'm teaching you. So I thought with my intervention, I need to tell the students why it is that I'm doing this with them also. So I always had on my slides a slide that said the purpose of what we were doing together, which was to learn how to be better listeners, bring students and staff closer together, because when we feel more connected, our capacity to learn can increase. And definitely what I want for my students is for them to feel connected and for their capacity to learn to increase. So we do this to connect with others and increase our learning. Okay, so here's how I collected data. I did a survey pre and post intervention. I did the pre-survey with students in the classroom the last week of January, and then I did the post survey the very last day, foreseeing that we were going to have a big break. I did not foresee we wouldn't be coming back, but foreseeing we would have a break and that might impact my data, I quickly did the survey on the last day of school on March 13th, which also meant we had a pretty low attendance rate that day, which did impact the amount of students I had that were able to complete the survey. There were 31 questions on my survey. There was a survey also for the teacher, who then that was less than 31 questions. Considering permission slips that were signed and who was in class the first time the survey was taken, as well as the last time, I had 17 student data points I could use, which meant I had the same students answering my pre and my post survey for my data collection purposes. So 17 out of 32 students total in the class. So here's some of the student outcomes. Honestly, one of my big takeaways from doing this project was in just collecting data. So I'm not sure that the students necessarily felt like a huge increase in their connection to one another based off of what some of this data is telling me. So the first question was, I trust other students in my class. Pre-survey, 11% of students felt that was very true. Post-survey, the same. Pre-survey, 29% said that's a lot true. Post-survey, that number increased slightly to 35%. It wasn't a huge gain, but what I did notice was that at the end of the survey, I had 11% of students say, you know what, not true at all. It's not true that I trust other students in my class, whereas at the beginning of the survey, none of those students answered not true. So that seemed kind of like a step in the backwards direction to me. The next survey question that I used for this presentation was, I have at least one teacher I can talk to my problems about. Pre-survey students answered 11% said that was very true. Post-survey, I thought that was a big jump. It went from 11% to nearly 30% of students saying, yes, that's true. Very true for me. I have at least one teacher I can talk to my problems about. So whether that was a classroom teacher, myself, or someone who came in during that intervention, or something totally unrelated that happened while this was going on, I'm not sure. But it is clear to me that students perhaps could have felt that there was an increase in a teacher or adult at the school they could talk to. Another question I asked was, I can talk to other students in my class about problems I'm having. Pre-intervention, 17% of students said, yes, this is very, very true. And post-intervention, that 17% went away. And maybe some of them fell into the a lot true category, because that a lot true increased from 17% to 35% from pre and post intervention data. But I'm not sure that this led students to feel entirely more connected to one another. Although the question, I can talk to other students about problems I'm having, at the beginning, before the survey, 23 said, nope, I can't. And by the end of it, 11%, it did decrease to 11%. And so maybe some of them felt like, well, I feel a little bit closer to other students. Another question I asked was, I feel good about my school. Pre-survey, 11% of students said very true. Post-survey, that dropped to 6%. Pre-survey, 17% of the students said not true at all. They said, I do not feel good about my school. But at the end of the survey, that number decreased to 11%. So maybe after doing this, a couple students felt like, I feel a little bit better about school. Maybe that was also because they knew they were leaving for 2 weeks that day. So some of the qualitative data I gathered from students after the intervention was over, I asked them the question, what did you like about this? And so some students said, it's fun to talk to people you haven't talked to. Sometimes I got my friend. One student liked that it got reduced to 3 minutes. Another student liked that it took up 10 minutes of class time. So there's a lot of kind of different feedback from students, but actually overall, some of the feedback was very, very positive. Students said, I liked being able to start class after talking, not just having to be quiet. I like meeting new people. It's an excuse to build a relationship with others. It calmed me down. I get to talk to different people. So there was actually a lot of positive feedback and a qualitative way from students. So I do like asking this kind of question in doing survey and data collection. Some of the teacher outcomes from the survey, I asked the teacher, I asked her, how many students in your class are of concern to you because of their sense of isolation or belief that they are not liked? And pre-intervention, she said 5. Post-intervention, she said 8. And so that kind of startled me at first, thinking, okay, so more students are of concern to her. That's concerning to me. However, another way I look at that is she was able to meet and speak with students and actually maybe get to know them a little bit more and see where like that concern was probably always there. She just didn't know it. And so through doing this connection, she was able to become aware then of maybe things she would want to be aware of. Another question I asked was, how many minutes per day are you frustrated because of student behavior? Pre-intervention, she said 30 minutes. Post-intervention, she said 20 minutes. And I asked specifically for her to give feedback on this class period, not like all class periods in general. So that was a decrease in her frustration of student behavior, which is good for all of us. We all are going to perform better in our jobs and in our roles and as humans in general when we experience less frustration. And then her qualitative feedback to me was that this was definitely more than 5 minutes a day, which it was. I think it did build community. However, I think the chaos of the virus and then inconsistent delivery made it more difficult for students. And that is good feedback for me to have. Okay, here's what I learned. Group goals can be the very beginning of building community. At the beginning of this intervention, actually before I started the intervention, before I even did this survey, when I was gathering permission slip forms, I told the class, and there's 32 students, I said, I need 80% of these back. If I get 80% as a class, you will all, every one of you, earn a donut, like a donut party. I brought donuts one morning. And so I gave them like 3 weeks to get the permission slips in. I went in about once a week and said, okay, this is how many we have. And I calculated the percent, or I would have like a student calculate the percent for me. And they did get their 80%. But I think some of that was kind of nudging each other like, hey, get your permission slip turned back in to Mrs. Anderson. So I think that by itself almost builds community because kids are working together. I also learned that asking for feedback can be quick and informal. See the photo here. So about 2 weeks into the intervention, I was like, oh my gosh, this is not really going very well. Like it was kind of rough. Students already had a whole semester of school together. So they already had their routine in that class. And then I entered and kind of changed all that. So it was rough at the beginning. And so I did these little quarter sheets of paper with just some very easy questions for them to answer. I asked like, what do you like about it? Do you participate? What parts do you like? How could it be better? So I got different kind of student feedback about it. Some students said, you know what, this was too much time. And so I actually kind of swapped the times for them after receiving that. And I went into the class and I said, hey, I looked at your feedback. Based on your feedback, here's the changes that we're making. And instead of going 2 minutes, and then 1 minute, it turned into 1 minute sharing, 1 minute sharing, 2 minutes of finding the common, what we have in common together. And so I did that because that was something the students asked for. And hopefully my goal in that too is that they felt bought in, like I care about them and I listen to them and making changes based off what they say. So this was honestly like really valuable feedback for me because I could read it while I was walking the hall back to my office. It wasn't anything super fancy, as you can see. It's just some slips of paper that I asked students to write their thoughts down on. I did also learn that classroom management makes a big difference. We struggled to just kind of get through this activity. It really is meant to be 5 minutes, and it turned out to be 10 or 15 minutes. depending on how long it took students to like find each other. They weren't excited about having to be partnered with someone they didn't know, so they're kind of dragging their feet. I'd have to walk around, kind of hoot and holler, get them all excited, which means I'd have to call out their cards and find out who their partner was supposed to be. So that part took longer than it should have, and it was not just a 5-minute intervention. But also, I think I learned to be mindful about how I'm going to collect and use data, because 31 questions was way too much. I took those questions straight off of the 5 Radical Minutes curriculum there, off of their program. And I totally should have cut some of those questions out. That was way too much. The kids didn't have a hard time answering them. I had a hard time making sense out of them. So I will, in the future, make my surveys much shorter because that was just far too overwhelming to try to make sense out of those questions. And also the way I asked them was kind of difficult too, as far as like a lot, a little. I will continue to use my written responses. So like the qualitative, like what did you like about this intervention, and just like the quick check in the 2 weeks in. So it was a 6-week intervention. I will do a quick check in with the slips of paper. I really liked getting that kind of quick and easy feedback that way. I will look at my pre-data earlier. So I gave the pre-survey the last week of January, and I didn't look at that data until I got the post-survey, and then I was comparing them side by side. But in the pre-survey, I asked a couple qualitative questions, such as, what could your school do, to make you feel more connected or help you feel more connected? What is something that you wish your teacher knew? And I think that some of those responses, had I seen them earlier, especially being a school counselor, I could have definitely followed up with some students and called them down to my office and had some more conversations with them. And even that by itself could have showed them, look, I care, and I'm going to pay attention to what I'm asking you to do. Because students wrote personal things in there, and I didn't follow up with them about it. And so that could be like another thing that they were like, well, I put something pretty, important to me on there, and Miss Anderson never mentioned anything to me about it afterwards. And that could actually have a student feeling like they're not connected, or that I'm not connecting to them. So I learned I will look at my pre-survey before before like really moving further in my intervention, actually. And then be realistic about my time. This was a daily intervention from February 3rd to March 13th. I knew I was going to be gone out of the building at least one time a week, because I would be at a different site doing an elementary school practicum. And so there was a couple other times when like something came up, whether it was like a meeting I couldn't get out of, or like a crisis with a student. And so I wasn't able to make it to class. And so there was some inconsistency in the delivery. Sometimes the teacher was able to do it for me, and sometimes she wasn't, but the inconsistency does hurt. And so I learned to be more realistic about what I'm really able to commit to in the future. I actually loved doing this project, even though my overall takeaway is that it wasn't super effective for what I wanted it to be. I learned a lot from it. And so thank you for listening to my presentation. And also, I just want to say a special thank you, though they will probably never see this, to my teacher and my students. Thank you to all of you for just allowing me into your classroom. I took away learning time from you to do this, and I asked you to do things that was uncomfortable for you. I asked you to talk with students who you wouldn't normally talk with, and what we talked about had a wide range. Like the first day, I asked to talk about your favorite pizza or your favorite food. But by, a couple weeks in, I was asking people to talk about, like, what do you think about honesty and trust? And those are like a little scarier topics to share with other people about. So just recognizing, I asked people to take a step outside their comfort zone, and like it wasn't really an option. It was kind of like, we're doing this. And I just appreciate that everybody hung in there with me. So thank you very much. And that is my presentation.